In early July 2025, we were dropped off by float plane on the upper Baillie River near the border of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. Our route was down the Baillie and back rivers to Upper Garry Lake, then south via the Sand and Naujatok rivers to Aberdeen Lake on the Thalon River. On our first night, we were hammered by a massive thunderstorm, which ushered in a howling north wind. This cold wind, often accompanied by driving mist and rain, set the theme for the next 3 weeks. We have canoed extensively in the Arctic over the past 45 years and have never before encountered the unrelenting wind and cold that we experienced on this trip. Near the end of our adventure, we spent 3 days windbound on the north shore of Sand Lake. This has exhausted our weather cushion and also drained our resolve, so we ended the trip there. The big thunderstorm on our first night dumped a lot of water on the Baillie watershed. The river rose at least 2 feet overnight, and we noticed blooming fireweed 18 inches underwater. I had paddled the Baillie River in 1984 at lower water level and encountered a small volume, enjoyable stream with long stretches of calm water between steep runnable rapids. In 2025, we gingerly picked our way down the swollen river, carefully running each steep drop, then threading the line between wildly boiling eddies and large wave trains. Not too technically challenging, but intimidating nonetheless. Of course, the gusting north wind added to the fun. Flowers, in particular lupins and moss campion, put on quite a show. On the other hand, mammals were scarce along the Baillie. Maybe we were too busy navigating the rapids and missed the parade. 1 moose and 1 red fox were all that we saw until we reached Hawk Rapids on the back river. Even in the wind, lots of mosquitoes and a few black flies would find us in camp. However, it was the cold wind, not the bugs, that drove us to shelter in the cook tent. Jeez. weather cooperated for the 4.5 days it took for us to paddle down the back river to Pelly Lake, and we were able to make up for lost time. For the first third of this stretch, the river is wide and flows through a very flat plain with few identifiable landmarks. At Hawk Rapids, which we easily snuck down the right shore, the river narrows and picks up the pace. One of the unnamed rapids downstream from Hawk Canyon is actually more challenging than Hawk Rapids. The river character changes again about 90 kilometers above the big lakes. The current slows down and the river meanders through wide sandy sections. Finding a deep channel through the sandbars becomes very challenging. Yeah, for sure. Back River, just before the big sandy section. The nemesis north wind returned when we arrived at Pelly Lake. We were stuck on shore for most of one day, but with a very early morning start and a long day of paddling, we managed to finish the lake section with only one gnarly crossing. We exited Upper Garry Lake at the mouth of the Morse River. From there, we pond hopped eastward to the river flowing from Sand Lake. From a scenery perspective, this was a highlight as we climbed over several high sand ridges and paddled stunningly clear lakes. However, our enjoyment was tempered by 2 full days of wind-driven mist, accompanied by temperatures barely above freezing. Above Pelly Lake, on the back river, we began to encounter stone tent rings and other signs of the Inuit who had once occupied this region. From the Morse River to the end of our trip on Sand Lake, it was obvious that the route we were taking had been heavily used in centuries past. In some places, we had to be careful setting up our tents to avoid disturbing tent rings. A 2.5-day weather window enabled us to enjoy the ascent of the river to Sand Lake. Most of this was paddling on lakes or slow current river with a few portages around shallow rapids. The country we passed through, south of Garry Lake, contained no vegetation taller than mid-calf. The tallest plant was the cotton grass. On one portage we encountered a large patch of Sudetton's lousewort. Its beautiful flowers are reminiscent of miniature orchids. Once we reached Sand Lake, a wide bay full of whitecaps stopped us. We stayed at that spot for 3 nights until the gale relented. At this point, the flex days in our schedule had been devoured by the wind, and we were faced with 100 kilometers of unknown territory ahead of us. We felt it prudent to arrange for pickup in the Narrows at the south end of Sand Lake. We spent the last 6 days of our trip poking around Sand Lake as the weather allowed. It is a spectacular place with gin-clear water confined by sandy hills. Multitudes of tracks and many deeply worn trails indicated that a huge herd of caribou had passed across the Narrows just before we arrived. We did see many stragglers, including one herd of 50 or so.